Welcome back to Unnamed History Show, guys. This week we will be reviewing Braveheart. Now, again, like 300, I've actually never seen this movie. This means I'll be reacting in real time as well as giving my knowledge on the time period. However, before we get started, someone else is joining me that has a large interest in the medieval period. Say hi, Xavier.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm back again. I know you're probably sick of me at this point, but he needed a history expert, and so I'm here.
With that being said, let's get right into it. Now, while 300 is arguably more popular, there are millions of fact versus fiction articles on Braveheart. This creates the challenge for me as a creator to make it unique and entertaining for you, the viewer, so you don't click off and just watch another video of the same topic. So at the end of this movie, I will tell you how I would personally tell the story and change some of the aspects to make it more interesting and more historically accurate, and finding the balance in between. Braveheart takes place during the First Scottish War of Independence, during the 13th century. To give you an idea of how far back this is, the Magna Carta was written about 80 years prior, which was one of the first legal documents that in modern history to give citizens rights such as due process and private property, and is what many other documents such as the US Constitution is based on. The problem with telling the history of the First War of Scottish Independence is that most sources are owned, created, or in some way regulated by either Britain or Scotland. In this case, it is the BBC and Encyclopedia Britannica, which is based in Scotland. This problem, which occurs in many primary documents being written by participants in a war or conflict and not by a third party, gives the opportunity to create discrepancies in the truth in order to make the storyteller seem more heroic, the enemy more brutal, or the heroes seem more morally righteous. Think of it as the historical equivalent of when Coca-Cola paid for the studies about the effects of sugar on the human body. They have some leverage to bump the numbers a little bit.
Historians from England will say I am a liar, but history is written by those who have hanged heroes.
I like that they put
The King
that.
of Scotland had died without a son, and the King of England, a cruel pagan known as Edward the Longshanks, claimed the throne of Scotland for himself. Scotland's nobles fought him.
Pause it for a
Fought
second.
each other over the crown.
Pause it.
So long.
Yep.
Alright.
So, his nickname is Edward Longshanks. The shank, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the shank is the cut of the meat that's like the hamstring region, like the upper thigh buttocks region. So, essentially, his name is Edward Longbottom.
Nice. They're calling him Edward Thick.
Thick boy Edward. He's definitely put his leg days in.
Yeah. All right. Did you hear me when I said I like the fact that they even put in there themselves what I had put in the script, which was history is written.
Had altered the perception of history.
Yeah.
Because it was written by them.
They put history is written by those who hang the heroes. I like that they put that.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and unpause it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So much like any conflict, first, we'll explain why the conflict occurred in the first place. It all started when the old British Empire, acting as the old British Empire does, had an epiphany it seems to have at least once every century, which is, hey, I think we need more territories.
Sam, well, there it is, the world. And right there, in the middle of it, is England. Tiny little country with a big idea to take over everywhere else and become really, really powerful.
The only exception being in the 1900s, when instead it went, hey, those people think they need our territories. Anyway, back to the scope of the 13th century. Around the same time, all of the heirs to the Scottish throne had died. meaning that Scotland had the same thought that all European countries had before the 1700s.
I'm in danger!
Any power vacuum created in a country meant that the big guys could come in and wreck shop. However, this power vacuum was quite unique, and rather than the British and French coming in and taking over with no throne, the Scotch actually invited King Edward I to come to Scotland and pick the Scottish heir in order to stop a civil war occurring in the country.
Shanks invited them to talks of truce. No weapons. One
I should probably say, I know I just unpaused it, but it said that it just said that Edward had invited them to call truce. I don't know why I exited full screen, my bad. It said, let me go back to make sure I got that right.
Yeah, I heard it said Edward had invited them to call a full truce.
Yeah.
No weapons, 1 page only.
It was the other way around. Scotland invited Edward, as far as I could tell. Now, hindsight being what it is, this was probably the most idiotic decision a nation could make. Having Britain pick your heir is the same as your friend that has 100 days played in Super Smash Bros. Picking the character you play. And the winner literally gets 30,000 square miles of land. Now, when Edward had to choose the heir, there were 2 main runner-ups to the throne. However, Edward said, "Screw that, I'm gonna pick my own men." And he tried this not once, but twice. Think of the same Super Smash Bros. Analogy, but instead of selecting your character, your friend literally chooses who plays for you in your place. Scotland returned to Edward and said that Edward had to choose between the 2 runner-ups to the throne and not some random guy off the street. The 2 men up for the throne were John Balliol and Robert the Bruce. In 1292, Edward chose the former.
I speak for all of the Bruces and for Scotland.
They've shown Bruce, where's John? They showed one contender for the crown. Where's the other contender for the crown?
Sir, inasmuch as you and your captains hail from a region long known to support the Balliol clan, may we invite you...
That was the first pause. That was the first mention in this entire fucking movie of the other. Oh my god. They went an hour.
The guys who also have a claim to the throne?
Yes, they went an hour of 30 minutes into this movie, not even mentioning the other person that was up for the crown. And here they even whenever they mentioned him, it was like cheap. They just threw out his last name and that's all they did. All it was a name drop.
How do you spend the whole movie talking like Robert the Bruce is like on the screen of he's not just mentioned, he's like a prominent-ish character throughout the movie, and like, you don't mention the guy who is his rival for the throne.
That's like trying to think of a good example.
It's like you mention Robin, but you don't mention Batman.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like making a movie about like Obama, but you don't mention like Bush at all, or you don't mention Romney at all. I mean, it's like you have to mention who they're going up against. Yeah. Especially whenever it causes a war. Imagine if Obama and Mitt Romney caused like a civil war in the US and they made a movie about it, but the whole time they just talk about Obama. A few years later, in 1294, Edward was fighting the French in the Anglo-French War. Edward asked Scotland to assist them, to which they refused. France saw this as an olive branch and decided to make an official treaty with Scotland, making them official allies. If either was attacked, the other would interject. Something I don't like, though, is that they haven't addressed once the Scottish-French alliance, which was one major reason for the for this conflict in the first place. Because France and the French and British were obviously great rivals, and while when the French and the British were fighting, the British asked for Scotland to help out because, it was a province of theirs. And did I use that word correctly? Province. It was territory. Whatever word you want to use. So they asked Scotland, hey, we're fighting, help us out, because we basically own you anyway. It'd be like the U.S. asking Puerto Rico to help, fight in a war. It's like, Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. And so Scotland basically said no. And so France was like, hey, thanks for not attacking us, man. So we're going to make an alliance with you. And the British were like, yo, what the hell, man? You're making an alliance with my greatest enemy here. What are you doing? And so, yeah, they came in, and that the British were like, you can't make an alliance with the French. We hate the French. You know this. And that caused a lot of the conflict as well that's going on here. But they haven't mentioned that at all in the movie, from what I've seen.
Well, I don't think you understand the degree of conflict between medieval England and medieval France. The English and the French are at war before and during the Scottish Rebellion.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
I'm trying to fix my lighting, but I'm listening to you.
So the 100 Years' War, which is a war that lasts over 100 years between France and England, starts almost exactly after the Scottish Rebellion ends. So England and France are essentially at war for the entirety of the medieval period.
Yeah.
So, and actually, the extent of the conflict between them is so strong. It's even on a cultural level. So in England, they don't use forks to eat their food. Forks have been made illegal in England because they were invented by the French. So at an English dinner table, instead of eating with a fork and a knife, you might have a spoon if you had a soup course or soup in your feast. And everyone carried a knife around, but you would just eat with your hands if you were an Englishman, because it was French to use a fork. And that's how much they hated each other, so much that the English didn't use forks.
It's hard to pick a time prior to World War I when the French and the British weren't fighting each other. I'm just gonna be honest. So yeah.
That's actually one of
if they weren't fighting the French, they were fighting Spain, pretty much.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why the French helped us during the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Because they hated the English.
With the British Empire and France being great rivals, the treaty was essentially a declaration of war to Britain from Scotland. Edward, being the one that put John in power in the first place, responded with,
I am the Senate.
Not yet.
It's treason, then.
In 1296, England overthrew Scotland's king and deemed Edward the ruler of Scotland.
Grant them prima nocte.
I want to talk about this. This is actually perfect. So, much like many things in history, historians battle back and forth about what's actually true and what isn't. So some say that prima nocta wasn't an actual law; it didn't exist. Others say that Edward did enact prima nocta, and so he went in and declared it just like he did here. And what prima nocta means is whenever women get married, rather than the husband having sex with them, the king and his knights can go in and just basically rape whatever women they want on their wedding day. So, yeah, it's pretty fucked up.
I don't know where somebody comes up with that from.
So yeah, the way he said like the problem is it's filled with Scots, and he's basically saying he's declaring prima nocta because he wants to populate with the land.
He's trying to purify the Scottish blood.
Yeah,
English blood,
he wants to change the gene pool with English, basically. So
that's just part of burn, rape, and pillage.
Yeah. I don't like
logically that makes sense. Morally, of course, it doesn't make sense, but logically, yeah, I see why that makes sense.
Scotland easily submitted, but national resistance slowly began to rise again until our main character emerged, William Wallace. William Wallace was a noble, but among the nobles he was very average. Even BBC says William Wallace was born in the 1270s into a gentry family. Very little is known about his early years, and there are no significant periods of his life for which there are no reliable sources. End quote.
Home, boy.
I want to go.
Go home, William, or you'll feel the back of my hand.
Right there. That good?
Yep, that's fine. So, two things that I want to point out in this scene. One, everybody is for some reason covered in mud and dirt. And I guess for William, because he's a kid playing around in the mud, that kind of makes sense. But the adults should not be wearing, like, Malcolm Wallace is a Thane of Scotland, meaning he's a landlord of Scotland. So he's nobility, he's got money. So he should not be covered in dirt and wearing dull-colored clothing.
But I like how you were talking about like they're dirty, like they're looking like Texans right now with the winter storm, like not being able to shower with no water.
Yeah, there's like this. I don't know where people get it from, but there's this huge misconception that everyone in the medieval period was, except for the king, was like super dirty and wore these dull-colored clothes.
We can read. And we do not have to feed them. Just fight them. Now, who's with me?
I am Wallace.
So wait, why do they say that they're just farmers? Is the Wallace clan not a noble family yet?
It is. It has some aristocracy to it, but yeah, I don't know why they're just acting like they're just. Again, it's kind of like with the clothing and being dirty. They're acting like they're just peasants. Like,
yeah.
Wallace's dad, not only was he a lord, but he was also a sir as well. He was Sir Malcolm Wallace.
He was knighted?
Yeah. So it's like, yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing the reason they did it is for cinematic purposes, to make it more of a juxtaposition between the social class of the main characters versus the English.
Yeah.
Just to make it seem like the English were weaker, or the English were stronger than they were, and then the Scottish were weaker than they actually were, just to make it a bigger David and Goliath story.
Yeah, it's the exact same problem as explained in the beginning of the movie, but in reverse, which I also put in the script I wrote for this video. Is like, it's like, okay, we can take the British story where it's like everything is more about like how the British were in the right, blah blah blah, and so it's like, all right, well then if the British are gonna bump their numbers, then let's look at the Scottish side of it. Looks like the Scottish are gonna bump their numbers too. It's like, you know, they're they're gonna make themselves seem more like oppressed, and the king had like the silver spoon and like all that kind of stuff. When like I said, like Wallace's dad was a knight. Like they aren't rummaging for scraps as depicted in the movie. So his father was Sir Alan Wallace, whom died in 1291 at the Battle of London Hill. The belief theory is that his education then fell onto his uncle, who was a priest. They show this in the movie when his uncle rides up in the beginning of the movie, saying that he teaches Wallace how to use a sword. Instead, Wallace would have been a noble, as stated before, and trained in how to use a sword way before his uncle ever came along.
William,
I don't know.
I'm your uncle. Nice guy.
Alright, I'll pause to talk about this. So, it's unconfirmed whether his uncle taught him, but that is the, like, well-believed theory. So, yeah. That's all I really have to say about it. So, I can't really talk about the historical accuracy of this because it's not confirmed, but since it's well believed, I commend the movie for having his uncle kind of be his mentor and everything. Because however, I feel like what the movie is about to go with this is that, oh, he learned all his military tactics under his uncle. Even though his uncle took care of him because his father wasn't there, he wouldn't have learned all of his military stuff like from his uncle. Because again, his family like already had some aristocracy to it. And so by the time he was this age with his father dying, he already would have known how to handle a sword and everything like that. So.
Well, here's the thing, even back then, there were schools for learning martial arts and combat and tactics and all that, so you could technically learn from an individual, but, like, there are manuals and texts and schools for teaching combat and the military arts in the medieval period. Like, there are even surviving texts that people refer to for modern day interpretations of historical combat. So if he were to become an actual soldier and learn to fight properly, he would probably just go to school or have a military teacher, an experienced knight or general teach him.
Yeah.
I mean, his father or his uncle probably could know a lot of this information, but there are actual schools and places to learn this kind of thing.
In 1297, a year after Edward deemed himself ruler, Wallace burned down the city of Lanark and killed the English sheriff of the town. He then had other successful attacks at Scone, Ancrum, and Dunda. His popularity, however, typically revolves around the Battle of Stirling Bridge. After the Battle of Stirling Bridge, Wallace was knighted by an unknown person and made the official Guardian of Scotland. The reason why he was knighted by an unknown person is because this was a battle for the throne, and usually you were knighted by the king. If the king was up in the air at this time, then who knights you? Now, battles on bridges give a slight disadvantage to invaders and slight advantages to the invaded. Much like the 300 Hot Gates, a bridge created one path that the enemy must pass through to conquer the other side. The enemy may be able to go over the river itself, but that's depending on how strong the current is and how deep the water is. While in the river, you have to fight your enemy and the water. Let off the enemy, you get killed. Let off the water, you get swept away and drown. The water itself can also be used as a weapon by your enemy. If they grab your head and force it into the water, they can force you to drown. This gave the victory to Scotland because When the English came to the bridge, their heavy armor weighed them down in the water, causing many of them to drown. Let's see how the movie looks at this. So I haven't brought it up yet because I was hoping that they would still fix it, but the Battle of Stirling was actually the Battle of Stirling Bridge, because there's supposed to be a bridge. They're in the middle of a field. Come on now.
Bambino, this does not smell like spicy meatballs.
Like, where's the river? Where's the bridge? The fuck you doing?
I want this Wallace's heart on a plate. Archers!
Well, eventually he'll get what he wants.
Yeah, that's true.
Wait, why are they putting the archers in the front? The archers go on the back and at a high position to shoot over the army before the cavalry charges in.
Because this movie's doing everything wrong, Xavier. They're not even at a bridge for the Battle of Stirling Bridge.
I'll tell you what, there is a bridge. The bridge between reality and nonsense.
This could not be more inaccurate, unless like they gave Wallace a gun.
Drives up in his Cadillac, opens up the window to drive by.
Yeah. This would be a really cool scene for like movie violence and war if there was a fucking bridge. All you needed was a river with some water and a bridge over it, and you're good.
I'm sure there's plenty of bridges in England and Scotland to choose from, and there's plenty of rivers to find those bridges on.
Yeah.
And Scotland is a wet place. There's a lot of water. There's gotta be rivers and bridges.
And again, there was only one Scottish casualty throughout the Battle of Stirling Bridge. As you can see, there's no bridge in the movie, which was the whole reason that Scotland won the battle in the first place. The Battle of Stirling Bridge left 5,000 English dead and only one Scottish casualty. The battle was so bloody that English's treasurer Hugh Cressingham had his skin, quote, flayed and taken as a trophy of victory to make a belt for Wallace's sword.
This movie's got too many problems with it.
Yeah. Well, luckily we can walk away from it for now. We can take a break right here, but the sad part is we have to come back tomorrow and rejoin the punishment, re-indulge.
I better get a decent amount of sleep tonight. Everybody is for some reason covered in mud and dirt, so he should not be covered in dirt and wearing dull-colored clothing. Like, the richer you are, the more colorful your clothing was, and you wanted to show off how colorful your clothing was if you could afford it.
Where do you think you're going?
Whoa. Pause. Even if you were the poorest peasant, making clothing was free. Jesus, these costumes are atrocious. And again with the potato sack. So is the woman her mother, or his mother?
I would assume so.
She should be wearing her hair up, in an updo, not down. Yeah, the mother should be wearing her hair done up.
Did the priest
And,
give
like,
a poetic benediction?
Pause right there, right now. He should not be in combat uniform.
Unless he's in combat.
Unless he's about to go into combat. He should not be wearing furs. So the helmet that they're wearing is called a kettle hat. Why do they have a cross in the middle of the woods?
An assault on the
That
king's
knight should not
soldiers
be wearing a cape, nor should he have shoulder armor.
is the same as a...
And that is not what a wooden fort would look like.
Patrol returning, my lord!
Why do you need palisade spikes? on the towers if nobody's gonna even get there? Whoever designed this fort didn't even understand basic, like, principles of defense. Ugh, no torches, candles, man.
Come in.
Why are the knights' horses not armored?